3 minutes past. Let's kick off. Welcome everybody. This is part 2, stream 1 of the BGA FRTOL course. Today, Shula is going to be presenting. I'm just going to organise the breakout. So, Shula, over to you.
And good morning, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So let me just see if I can share the screen. Great. So above all then today is a chance for you to practice, and we've got if we can make good progress, hopefully we've got 3 breakout sessions which we're now used to, which start about 30 minutes in, something like that. So that's the primary purpose. Second purpose really is to answer your questions, because you can't really practice if you've got questions in your mind. So we love your questions. The questions that we'll prioritise answering are those that relate to part 2. Obviously, we'll prioritise those. Those that are coming up or relate to things that are coming up later, we may deal with, or we may just ask you to be patient and say that we'll be coming up next week or in successive weeks. One other thing to notice, if you haven't already, is that your questions are being captured by Paul, and he's putting those on an FAQ on his site. So one way or another, you'll get your questions answered. The other way that we'll answer questions we've already seen is that Paul and Andrew will grab them from the chat. I'm not reading the chat. And at various points in this presentation, they'll come in. They may just answer them, bounce them to me to be answered. And of course, it's a chance to reinforce certain aspects. One point on the chat, probably what Andrew's done is he's made it that if you want to ask a question, you're going to need to direct it to Andrew or Paul. So just don't forget to look for that option. Okay. At the end of this session then, let me just adjust my screen so I can see everything. We will have reviewed the initial and full messages. So some people will think, oh, well, I've got that in the bag, I can do that. Well, great. Then this is a chance for you to really practice the rhythm and the cadence and get it really bagged and really sound. And for those who need more practice, then you're definitely going to get more practice of that. As Paul said last week, the initial full calls are really the foundation item. And again, another thing I heard him say last time was, we all know everything's much harder in an aeroplane. So the idea is to get really fluent at your desk. Then there's a chance you can be 100% fluent at your desk. Then hopefully we might be 75% fluent in the aeroplane. So really, as he said, no apologies for practicing those again. We'll discuss a little bit about how to know what to call the ground station, but not to get too uptight about that. Some hints on that, or some more hints on that. When we've done that, we'll go on to talk about the 3 different types of controller. So in inverted commas, and with apologies to the real air traffic controllers out there, when I'm using the word controller, I'm using it to denote the person at the ground station. And the last thing we're going to specifically concentrate on today then is the readbacks, what has to be read back and what doesn't need to be read back. Okay, well, before we go to initial message, Andrew, it's Chilla Singer here. Can I have a black Americano? And that's the initial message.
Not in this household, unfortunately. We're all breathing.
But if you remember that, then you have remembered the initial message. His name, my full name, and what I want. That's all there is to the initial message. Okay, how do you know who they are? So lots of ideas have already come up. I know Paul's mentioned one of them, the frequency cards. Really the best single tip I want to give is listen in first. So again, if you're following the device and the flight's working out well, you've tuned in good time when you're high, you're not in a thermal, you've done your lookout, listen into the frequency first. You will discover their name if you had any doubt at all. In the context of gliding, we're never doing a route for the first time. Everybody's done it before. There might be other people doing it. So ask around on the gliding field, who are good units to call? What is the correct call sign? What is the right frequency? Flight guides, pulleys, VFR guide, your LX, all places you can know who to call. And if you want to be really Anaraki about it, there's a complete wealth of information on something called the Electronic Aeronautical Information Package. And if you Google what's on the screen there, you will find it. Look for the Part 2 en route section. And as I did last night, you can find all the way out to Norway. So listen in first. And that's the initial message, as I'm sure you've all got now. So their name, your name, and what you want. Typical requests now. So obvious one really is to enter your zone or transit your zone. If it's a zone, let's think about Norwich. Let's think about a bit of Class D, say Norwich. Then this might be a taste thing. Rather than say Glider Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta wants to come into your zone, it might be useful to say would like to come into the southeast corner of your zone. So something which just helps the controller understand the scale of your ask or the geography of your ask could be helpful. If the zone, if the bit of airspace you're talking about is an ATZ, then we say ATZ, and that's how we say it. We don't say Alpha Tango Zulu. Another request might be to land at your airfield. So Shobden information, if that's what Glider Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta request, come into your zone to land, or approach to land. Zone transit we've mentioned. MATS penetration is another one, and I think Andrew's going to be doing those specifically next week. Yes, I know we don't have to ask for MATS penetration. Let's just say for RT, let's avoid the debate and say, keep it simple and ask for a MATS penetration would be what I would do. And the one we've been practicing a fair bit is to ask for a basic service. So Cranfield approach, Glider Alpha, Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, request basic service. Or again, it's a taste thing perhaps. It's my preference if I can scale the request or help the controller, I might say to cross your extended center line near Bedford. Again, I just think it gives the controller a heads up and helps them understand why you've called. So those would be typical kinds of requests. Okay, so let's just look at one. So imagine if there are any power pilots out there, and I think there might be one or two, I mean exclusively power pilots. Let me just say what glider pilots do is that they start off at their own airfield, they go somewhere, triangle sometimes, but they're aiming to come back. And a particular variety of this, not a triangle, is to go out to a named predetermined point and return back to their airfield. So that's called an out and return, and that's what this is. So this fictitious flight is Little Rissington, out and return to Upper Hayford. Where you are, and by the way, this slide is here for you to be generating your initial message. Where you are is just right of track, and you can see just south of Enstone, so just have a guess how far south you are. Choose any level you like, and the reason you're going to call Oxford approach is because you can see those fan lines. I think the recommendation is if you're going to pass within 10 miles of the airport and cross some fan lines, well, good idea to talk to the controlling airfield. So you've decided you're going to call Oxford approach to get a basic service in anticipation of crossing those fan lines en route to Upper Hayford, which, as I say, is at the end of that arrow. So, should have a pen and paper, imagine you have. Can I just say to you, write out your initial message, fairly quick time. Good. So that's what you should have on your sheet. Oxford Approach Glider Golf Delta Echo Juliet Request Basic Service. Now, if you'll allow me, from training people, what I notice happen when I do this in the classroom, I ask people to do their initial message and I get somebody to say it. And then you watch the relief in their shoulders as they've done their initial message. What you've got to remember is when you've done that, you've started. It's like Andrew came back to me with a reply about whether I could or couldn't have a coffee. That's exactly what's going to happen. You do your initial message, you've set in motion a sequence of events. So you've got to have thought, you've got to be listening, but even more than that, you've got to have thought ahead. So don't send your initial message until you've thought ahead. So what's going to come back is confirmation of your call sign, their call sign, sure, but these keywords, pass your message. That's your cue to send your full message. You still can't relax because now they're going to respond to your request. They're going to say yes, no, maybe, in a while, stand by, but let's say they say give you a request. And there'll be some other information, typically the Q&H. And therefore, there's yet another obligation on you, which is to read back. So let's just go ahead a little bit. So same flight. So sequence has started. You've got in front of you, I'm guessing, your initial message for Golf Delta Echo Juliet. I once beloved ASW20. Controller said pass your message. My advice to you now is to write out fairly quickly, shorthand, your full message. Could you just look up at the screen when you've done that? And Paul, would you just give me a verbal, or I can see you, Paul, give me a thumbs up when you think most people have done that. Okay.
We'll do, Chula, not yet then.
Oh, sorry. I thought that was... Thanks, Paul. Okay. So just have a compare with what you've written down to see if it compares with this. Of course, you've chosen your own level. I'm just needing to adjust my screen, excuse me a minute. Paul, there's no need to reply to this, but just so you know, I don't have a picture of everybody at this minute, so anything you need to say to me needs to be verbal. Okay, so if you've got exactly that, or pretty much exactly that, plus or minus the level, then great, well done. If not, then you know what it is you just need to work on. So as I said, what's now going to happen is the controller is going to come back to you with some information. almost always they're going to come back with a QNH. Could possibly be that they come back with a QFE, could possibly be they don't, because they know you're on the right QNH, but assume they're going to come back with a QNH. They're definitely going to comment on the basic service, and at this stage in the course, I think all the controllers and coaches are going to be giving you what you've asked for. So if you as a guide pilot has asked for a basic service, then you're going to get back a basic service. But just know for later on and for power, when you might be asking for different services, you may not get what it is that you asked for. So you do have to pay attention to that. If you've asked for a clearance, for instance, zone transit would be an example for Class D, then you're going to, if it's approved, then you're going to get that clearance. And alongside with a clearance, then I'm going to say there might be other permissions in there, or there might be restrictions to that clearance. So again, you have to listen. And there might be various requests. So could you stay below 4,000 feet? Could you stay south of a particular feature? Or they may have some questions for you about, typically about routing. And then you need to read back. So and the way to read back is to read back the required elements and only the required elements. So don't read back everything. Nobody wants to hear the wind vector going backwards and forwards unnecessarily. So as you know, in Cat 413, there's a whole long list of things that need to be read back, and we'll come onto that in a shorthand version in a moment. So read back the required elements in the same order that the controller gave them to you. So if the controller said QNH 1010 basic service, then you repeat back QNH 1010 basic service, concluding with your call sign. So that's the way to handle a read back. Okay, so what has to be read back and what doesn't? Well, the assumption is that you don't read back unless it's in the list of things to read back. And this CRAS mnemonic, or is it an acronym, Andrew will no doubt tell me in a minute, is a way perhaps to remember it, CRAS. So clearances. If it's a clearance, I know this isn't a very glider type one, but cleared takeoff is clearly a clearance. Cleared to transit the Bryce zone, VFR not above 1,500 feet is a clearance. That needs to be read back, and read back in exactly the same way as the controllers delivered it to you. It's a must read back item, along with any restrictions. So if the controller said stay east of Farmworth Reservoir, not very likely, but if he or she did, then that's part of the clearance and that needs to be read back. Can't be any doubt about that. I think this is a true statement. Any reference to runway, to all intents and purposes, is always true. If there's a runway mentioned in the information that the controller has given you, then that needs to be read back as well. Altimeter. For altimeter, you could say altimeter and altitude. So for altimeter then, any level, and level is a generic term to mean height, altitude, or flight level. So any level, descent to altitude 6,000 feet, QNH 1000, needs to be read back because that's a level. And any altimeter setting, QNH 1001, then those numbers must be read back. And any service type, for instance, basic service, radar service. So if the controller gives you a service, then he or she wants to hear you read that back, because this is a deal, like a contract that you've just made with the controller. You started this, remember, you got onto the radio and said, Norwich approach, glider, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request basic service. So you've made the ask, the controllers come back and said, glider, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, this is Norwich, basic service. So they're saying, you asked for it, yes, I'm giving it to you. And there can't be any doubt about what it is you've got. And if you don't repeat that back, then and of course I've heard people not repeat it back, and I've only ever heard controllers persist until they get the pilot to say back the service type. So those are the headline items that need to be read back. As I say, I know it's not exactly an exhaustive list. Good. So what questions, if any? Andrew, that can be verbal to you. I can't. Are there any?
Yes,
Or,
we've
great.
got a couple, well, we've got a couple of comments and amplifications on some of the things you said.
Okay.
Chris Aaron mentioned a couple of things. First of all, he said occasionally you'll hear a controller say, pass your details rather than pass your message.
Yeah.
As we've commented amongst ourselves, it's useful if we stick pretty strictly to Cat 413 when we transmit, but don't be surprised if you hear variations in what you hear in the replies.
Yeah, thanks.
And Chris also mentioned something that we will say explicitly later, which is if you want to land at an airfield, the correct form of the request is request join. But we will come back to that later. But just so that people know now, it's not request land, it's request join.
Yeah, thank you for that. Good, appreciate that. That's worth changing the slide for, so thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, we had a comment from Andrew Wood who said, I'm not sure I understand this example. What am I requesting? Will they deny you going to Upper Hayford? And I think an important point to mention now and maybe again later is, as long as you're in Class G airspace, none of these controllers is giving you an instruction that you absolutely are obliged to follow. What you're asking for in this circumstance, a basic service, is essentially you're letting them know where you are, how high you are, where you're going for their information. And if they have the time and the capacity, they may warn you about things like other traffic or changes in the weather conditions, but they're not obliged to. Do you have everything to add to that, Chula?
No, may I just reinforce the point here is that the only thing that you might get denied is the service that you ask for, so they can't tell you that you can't go to Upper Hayford. They can tell you that they can't give you a particular service that you've asked for. So that's really what that request is about. But I'm grateful for the question being asked all the same.
Chula, it might just be worth saying that they can deny you access to a Class D, which we'll come to in part 3.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions here that you might want to deal with. Let me see. Okay, should we ask for basic service? And I've said, yeah, if you don't ask for a service on a lot of these calls, the next thing you'll get is which service do you require? So if you're going to go through a particular area, you're likely to get a service. Unless the first thing you want to do is go into an ATZ and join for a landing, then you probably won't get asked that. But anything where you're going to be on frequency for a while and not in their bit of airspace, you'll get asked what service you want. What else have we got? Should we ask a controller, if we're going to come back through the same bit, should we tell them? And I think the answer to that one is probably I wouldn't do it unless I wanted to stay on frequency because my turning point was quite close.
Can I amplify just on that one, Paul?
Yeah.
So can I say there's a great tendency, it seems to me, for some people to want to tell the controller their whole route. And that's not Cat 413. And so unless there's some particular reason, Paul's just mentioned one why I'd stick to the formula. Lots of people have given it lots of thought over lots of years and avoid telling them more than you need to.
Yep, that's very true. Okay, should we write the readbacks down? I don't write stuff down in the glider. The important stuff I will capture though. I mean, if it's QNH, it will go onto my altimeter. If it's a squawk, it will go onto my transponder. The service is reasonably obvious. I don't typically write stuff down because I don't have a pen. Okay, what else have we got? There's a thanks, Tudor, for saying he or she, much appreciated and noticed. There's a can we expand on what basic service actually means, and that you will find in part 3. But basic service is tell me about stuff you think I need to know. some people talk about, well, I don't want a service. I'll tell them no service required. But actually what they want is a basic service. And we would recommend that's what you ask for.
Yeah.
So we'll come to the detail of that in part 3. Okay, and then we've got a Class G. How many LOAs, for example, Cambridge, which apply to gliders are there? Where can we find them? Not very many that you're going to come across just flying cross country. I think Cambridge is the obvious one. There's the Bristol Gap, one or two others. Where can you find them? I think the BGA have links somewhere to cover those.
Yes, Paul, there is a list that is actively maintained on the BGA website of all the letters of agreement, which covers also, of course, things like wave boxes as well. But if you Google for something like letters of agreement BGA, you'll find it. And of course, other search engines are available.
Was that it, Paul?
That is pretty much it.
Great, thank you. And I'll just take one very quick bite of the basic service debate, Cherry. So again, the three of us know that there's a constituency out there that are slightly reluctant to ask for a basic service. It's our unanimous, strongly held view. It's just the right thing to do. It's language that the controller understands. And as soon as you go away from that, then you're just creating a workload and unnecessary confusion. It's no big deal at all. I strongly recommend you just ask for a basic service.
Chula, I've got one more question.
Yeah.
Actually, no, Simon Whitfield says, I was generally taught to use radar rather than approach. And this, I think, is something that we will cover again later. You know, when do you call radar? When do you call approach? I think the bottom line is it doesn't really matter. If I call Cambridge Approach and they happen to be operating radar that day, they will reply as Cambridge Radar and let me know that they have radar. So, you know, if you don't know, yeah, it doesn't really matter.
No, and sorry, and again, I'm really grateful for the question because it tells me what I wasn't clear about. So what I was trying to say was when I put the initial message up and in the white writing it said listen in, what I was trying to say was if you listen in, you will hear what they call themselves. So because they always start with their correct name or call sign.
And it is worth mentioning that some units will go back and forth between being radar and approach, even, you know, a couple of times in the course of a single hour, as different controllers who have different qualifications come on and off duty. Even if there's a radar head on the airfield with a display and it's all fully functional, if there isn't a controller on duty who's licensed to use it, they will not be a radar unit until the controller who can use it comes on duty.
Yes. Or even, can I just, again, I'm going to bang that nail out of sight because it's kind of a surprising one, or even go from approach to tower, which is absolutely routine, and vice versa, absolutely routine at Cranfield, same frequency.
Yeah, if I can just contribute to that, I mean, there are some people where you know what it's going to be. So you call Lake and Heath radar, for example. They're always Lake and Heath radar. There are some that are confusing, like Cambridge, who might be approach, might be radar. You don't know until you've called them. What you listen. That's the confusion. And Cranfield is they do approach and tower on the same frequency.
Yeah.
Andrew, you had one more, which is an interesting comment. Desmond Pierce says, what happens if 50 gliders try to call at the same time, which we may do after this course? And Desmond, we road tested this for you last summer. We sent a task from Cambridge, past Cambridge, and the channel was solid back to back with gliders calling them on the outbound leg and then the return leg all afternoon. I believe they ran out of the paper slips that they have to use to write your details on when they get a call. They coped, they were very professional, it was very busy. We sent them a couple of bottles of wine afterwards to say thank you. But one point that did come up, and I'll mention it now because again it's something that's very important. Some people, having called them, then left the channel without signing off. And for the rest of the afternoon, slightly embarrassingly, every 20 minutes, Cambridge Approach was reading a laundry list of, you know, glider X, are you still on the channel, on the frequency? Glider Y, are you still on the frequency? Because they have to keep track of you. And if you don't sign off, you know, theoretically, they might even be starting search and rescue to find you. So if you call a controller of any variety, you've got to sign off when you leave the channel.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a really good point for the reputation of gliding. So I'll add another tip then. So thank you really for that point, whoever stimulated it. So just as much as we've said, when you make first contact, call when you're not too busy, you call when you're high and you're not stressed. Similarly, don't wait till you're low with your low power transmitter that we have in our gliders and can't get through, or you're just too busy to get through. So I suppose one of the early flying tips I was ever given as a 14-year-old was the art of flying is thinking ahead, thinking of the next two things to do. So similarly, say goodbye to controllers in good time. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you all for those questions. It makes it far more useful. Good, so now it's time to have a practice in groups. So this slide you should have picked up as part of your pre-read that Paul has put on his website. Thank you, Paul. So I've never been to Durham, so if I haven't got the places exactly right or call sign exactly right, live with it. This is about RT. So there's the item you're going to practice in groups. So this is going to be initial message, readbacks, full message, but not the actual zone crossing. So I think we allocated 20 minutes for this last week. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to do something like, well, depending on the size of groups. So Paul, you're working on that. And it takes about 50 seconds to go through this without any feedback, spoken slowly and methodically. So Paul, once you've got the size of groups, can I just ask you to suggest a sensible time for the group work, but not the luxurious sort of 20 minutes that we allowed before, probably. So
we've got similar size groups to last time. Group sizes are about 4 people plus a coach. So 15 minutes would be minimum, I think, but it's up to you how much you want.
Okay. I'll come back to that then. So the glider is where you see it on the map. So part of the challenge here is to think, where would you describe, and I'm not going to answer it, where would you describe yourself as being? Okay. All I'm going to say is that if there's any doubt, you are, because it matters for later on, you're west of the A1M. So think about the controller. No good mentioning a waypoint or some teeny village. Think how you would describe your position to the Durham approach controller. Your request is for a zone transit. You can be at any level you like. And your next turn is Stokesley. So here's a point. Let's imagine Stokesley isn't actually in your LX, is not drawn on your half mil. I've chosen Stokesley because if I was where that glider is, I would I'd either go to that mast, which is just from, I can't see it on my screen, but I think it's just southwest of Stokesley. If I knew the name of that mast, I would name that mast because the controller must know the mast, but it's not marked on my Sky Demon, so I can't name it. So I'm looking at that map thinking, how would I describe where I'm going, where I am and where I'm going? And Stokesley is a VRP, visual reference point, associated with Durham Tees Valley. So the controller will know that. And so I've described that, even though, and I'm going to go there or thereabouts, but even though it's not part of my gliding task. So if you go into your groups, please, and have a go at this. Coaches, thank you very much for your help here. The idea here is, of course, that people become really fluent at initial and full messages. If people are already really fluent and great at it, then wonderful. Then can you spice it up a little bit by forcing some use of language such as Roger, affirm, negative, Wilco, some such things? And if they all seem really on top of it, you might want to run them all as a sequence, which will force them to listen out for their call sign if you give them other questions on their way across. Okay, so about 4 groups, so that's be 4 minutes plus a minute each. I'm going to say 10 minutes should be enough for everyone, because everyone's done this a few times, hopefully been practicing. So let's go for 10 minutes. Thanks very much, Paul.
Great. Okay, thanks very much for having a go. What we're going to do now is questions arising from that. So now everyone's had a go. We'll be surprised if there aren't questions, but that's up to you. So please start typing away like mad if you haven't, if you've got anything that you want to ask. The things that occur to me to say are, and I meant to say this when I was going through on the run up to that exercise, you only ever say the name of the ground station once, and that's at the beginning of your initial message. You don't keep saying it. So if I was to be having a conversation with Paul, say, Paul, what are you doing today? Oh yeah, and Paul, what are you having for lunch? And Paul, are you getting ready for next week? And Paul, it would drive him and everyone else mad. So don't keep saying Durham approach. You only say it at the beginning of the initial message. You don't say it at the beginning of your full message. The other thing I don't think that we've made much of, if anything, is the really, really useful phrase, say again. Say again, technically finished off with your call sign. So say again, Glider Golf Delta Alpha. Don't be afraid to use that, it's fine. A variation on that is say again after basic service. So if the controller said basic service QNH 999 hectopascals, but you didn't get the QNH, you could say again after basic service, and the controller will repeat the last bit. So it's a really useful phrase. So those are two things that occurred to me from the group that I was with. Paul, are there any questions on the chat?
Let's see. On initial call, is it legitimate to ask zone transit rather than basic service? And
can I take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my view, if there's a real controller out there who thinks that I'm wrong on this, then we're happy to hear from you on Moot. Otherwise, my tip on that would be this. If you've really got two requests, ask for the one that's most important to the controller. Think of the other person. So if you're going to go through their zone, it seems to me that would be the thing that they'd be most interested in. So even if you do want basic service and zone transit, I would put in my initial message the fact that my request would be zone transit for the reason I've just given, because it must be more important to the controller. And also I've noticed that sometimes that they have squawks for the if they're providing a LARS, lower airspace radar service, outside of their controlled airspace, they may have one squawk and they've got a different discrete squawk for VFR transit traffic. So I think it's more useful to say in your initial message to have your request about the zone transit.
Julia, I've got an important interjection there on that.
Go ahead.
Are you happy? Yeah.
Yeah.
So inside controlled airspace, which you would be if you were getting a zone transit, you cannot be on a basic service. You have to be on a radar service.
Yeah.
So that's an important difference. So
yeah,
a bit confusing, really, asking for a basic service going through a zone.
Yeah.
Basic service and a traffic service and a deconfliction service, which are the three types of service you get, are all in class G.
Yeah.
Really and truly, for a zone transit example, basic service is probably inappropriate. But of course, you would be getting a basic service before you're in the zone and when you're outside the zone. So that's kind of implicit. So, but I think it's important to know that you can't have a basic service inside a controlled airspace.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we make that point in part 3 because it goes to radar control. But you know, you're going to be calling 10-15 minutes before you get to the zone. So they'll ask you what sort of service you want if you don't tell them you want a basic service.
Yeah. Paul, would you add another question?
Schuler, I've got one.
Is it okay to say Millfield to Millfield via Stokesley?
Okay, so I'd say stick exactly to the formula. It would, so I wouldn't, and it goes back to my point that I noticed some people just, I'm sure some people seem to want to complicate it, and for most of us it's really quite difficult to fly an airplane and get this right. So I try not to get too imaginative about it. It's from to position level with the QNH next, and I tend to stick to that. Were there any other questions, Paul? Andrew, I'll come to you.
In a MATS, it's still a basic. I guess basic service still applies to ATZ controlled airspace, although in Class G.
Okay, I'll go to Andrew. If there's anything else, come back, Paul. Andrew?
So Sandy Lloyd asked, how specific must your position be? Is, say, between Gainsford and M1 detailed enough, or does it need to be, X miles east of point Y, for instance?
I haven't got the chart in front of me. So long as that's not as long as that's not 20 miles long, then it's fine. I would say do your best. Do your sensible best. I hope that's an adequate answer to the person who asked that question. I get the sense that was the only question you had, Andrew. Paul, jump in if there's something else on your list.
No, I'm just redoing the group,
okay.
So give me a
all right. So let me then just move on. Okay, so I want to go on to types of controller, air traffic controllers out there, please note it's in quotes. So, and Paul, very quickly, we'll be going back to groups here. So, the three types of control that we might have are air traffic control, aerodrome flight information service, or air ground communication service. They have a geographical area of responsibility that you could describe. There's a suffix that comes after the geographic name. So we've just done Durham approach being the suffix. And there's a certain type of provision that they have, that they can give you rather. So that chart has not been filled in. Here on this chart, and again, this is on the pre-read, so hopefully you've downloaded it from Paul's website, or you've got access to this website. If you haven't, we're going to struggle. On this slide are the answers to those questions. So it's the tiles have been put in the wrong square. Your task in a group is to put these tiles in the correct row and column. Coaches, my encouragement to you here would be to, provided the group's got that, at least one person in the group's got the slide, is to try and leave them to it unless they really can't. But I imagine people, so groups, please try and have a go putting these in the right row and column, and come back to plenary when you've done it. So the last group back is a power pilot. Paul, could you please send people to groups?
How long do you want them in the groups for, Tudor?
Well, it's come back when they're done. So, give me the thumbs up, Paul, will you? And Paul, can people, when I'm sharing a screen, can people access the reactions?
Ooh, good question. Yes.
And is one of the reactions a thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay. And is everyone back now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. So obviously we're learning, and one of the things we're trying to do is to discover how to make Zoom interactive as we would do if we were all in one place. So that was a learning exercise for us as much as anything. I hope it was useful for you too. It would be helpful if you would do us this favor. On the reactions button, so you might need to move your mouse to the bottom of the screen and find reactions, you'll find a thumbs up. If you had access to a printed copy of these slides, so you could do the exercise, or you could see it on another device, would you click the thumbs up? And Paul and Andrew will just notice that for our own debrief, and that'll give us an idea how practical it was to do an exercise like that. I'll just leave another 5 seconds or so for you to find the thumbs up button and give us a thumbs up if you were so prepared. If you don't click the thumbs up button, then we'll assume that for one reason or other you were not able to do that. We didn't realise that that would have been helpful. Okay, thank you for doing that. So let's just look at this then. So let's just do the air traffic control row. So this is not meant to be exhaustive. It's meant to just give you an idea. So air traffic control, they'll control, for instance, ATZs, Class D, MATs, but also Class G. So, you know, as we were talking about when I had that discussion, forgive me, Sarah, I've forgotten your name, but the air traffic controller came in. So, but I can picture Bryce somewhere where I would fly around. The controller there, let's just say that I know I'm simplifying this to a degree. The controller there might be controlling within inside the zone, but also might be offering a service to traffic outside the zones. Hence, it could be Class G. Typical call signs are the geographic name followed by tower, approach, radar, zone. Zone, by the way, is a bit of airspace which goes down to the surface. So Wittering zone would be an example of an air traffic control ground station call sign. And they can issue clearances, instructions, and offer services, for instance, basic service. AFIS, you might have heard the term FISO, Flight Information Service Officer, so that's the correct name for the, in quotes now, the controller for an AFIS type station. And you shouldn't call them unless you're less than 10 nautical miles, and their area of responsibility is really the ATZ, and their suffix is information. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, any one frequency and station can change. So Shobden, I know, has changed between information and radio, which we'll get to in a moment, between days of the week. And they offer you information, potentially advice, and they can offer, and I've only recently discovered this because when I go past Sywell, they've started offering a basic service. So I've now learned that AFIS can offer a basic service. Air-ground communication service, the last row. Again, it's a 10-mile rule. They're really concerned with their own ATZ. Shobden radio. Radio is the suffix. So you'll get no instructions from them. So in the air, between AFIS and air ground, neither of them can give you instructions. Just if you go on to do the FRTOL, just one thing to note about this slide is that AFIS, if you're talking to a station which has the suffix information, they can give you instructions on the ground. So a clearance to taxi would be relevant for an AFIS station. Good, we'll move on. So in the air, it doesn't really make a lot of difference, I don't believe, between air traffic control and AFIS, or it's a simple rule to apply, deal with them the same. Air ground, if you were to apply the initial message, full message that we've just been teaching, that will work, nothing's wrong. It's possible to be a little bit more pragmatic. And I'm going to, everything, these slides are not for issues, you know, Paul and Andrew have done a fabulous job with the video and their slides, but this slide might, if you like it, might be worth just making a note. So this is a pragmatic way to deal with a station which has the radio suffix. Make your initial message, their name, your name, their call sign, your call sign, and you could ask, if you're just going by, your request could be, request airfield information. They'll typically reply with the runway and QNH and any relevant traffic. So runway 26 with the right-hand circuit, QNH 1001, one in, meaning one in the circuit, might be a typical reply. You do need to read back, and so in this case, that's the runway and QNH would need to be read back, and then pass pertinent information. Where you are, 2D, 3D, your level. So 3 miles west to currently, a good word for glider pilots to use, currently 2,000 feet, tracking towards Oxford. So that would be your intentions. So initial message, request airfield information, read back, and in your read back, say position level intentions. I would say that's a practical way to deal with an air ground station. If there are no questions immediately being typed on that, I want to go on and give people a go at that. So jump in, Paul, Andrew, if there are, while I just set up the last breakout. So on the last breakout, earlier today, we saw this out and return from Little Rissington. So I want you to imagine that you've got to Upper Hayford, great. You're now on your way back, and this time you're a little bit north of track, and you're a bit closer to Enstone. There's a QNH there, so make your own position up, make your own level up. There's probably only time to do this once, so we'll say conditions are good, and you're high, and really you're going to call, to use a phrase I heard Paul use last week, because you're a good citizen. Makes sense to let them know that you're there and you're going to be flying close by, but also you're likely to get some traffic information from them. So round one only, in breakout rooms, call Enstone radio, initial message, do the readbacks, and say where you are in 3D and where you're going, which is clearly Little Rissington.
And Chula, George Knight raised a point earlier, which is just worth underlining at this point. You are not going to get a basic service out of Enstone radio.
Correct. Hence your request is request AFN information.
Yeah.
Paul, is there anything else on your chat?
Yeah, but I don't think we've got time. We'll deal with it on the frequently asked questions afterwards. Chula, I'm going to drop Dave Fiddler in as coach for your group, so you can come back and then drop into other groups as you like.
Thanks very much. Okay, great. Okay, thank you all for having a go at that. Any last questions, can you write them down, and they the answers will be supplied on the FAQ on Paul's website, because we're now out of town. So really then, just to wrap up and say, we've reviewed and practiced the initial and full message, the zone crossings, basic service again. Readbacks, remember, read back in the order it was given, but don't read back unnecessary stuff. So if someone says report leaving the frequency or a report out of my area, then the response is Wilco followed by your call sign. And that's actually more important than it sounds. We've talked about the different types of controllers. Thank you for having a go with the experiment of some group work with the missing tiles. And of course, we talked about making contact with air-ground stations. And finally, just before I hand to Paul, my thanks to the coaches, because the thing that transforms this from watching just a webinar with someone talk is you've generously giving your time and working with the groups and giving people a chance to practice. Because we can all think we can do it in our heads. It's only when you do it to somebody else that it comes alive. So thank you very much. And that's me done. Paul.
Okay, thanks, Chula. Chula, do you want to stop sharing? Yeah, thanks. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time, all the attendees. Couple of points. We're trying to make the website a reasonably live thing. So, for example, you will find the briefings for the breakouts that we're doing. We're adding those to the website within a couple of days of the session. So go and look there. It's under the course materials part. And you will find the material for it under the particular part. Frequently asked questions, so we'll pick up on all the questions that got asked on this session and the other session, and we'll put those under the frequently asked questions. They again are dealt with part by part, so you can go look. So can I suggest you do that? And make sure you do look at the material that we're going to be using, because to have that to hand for the breakouts is going to save you time. Feedback by email is very welcome, as we said at the beginning. It's been suggested we have a chat with the coaches. I'm thinking I could set up a meeting, but actually if coaches just want to hang on for 5 minutes, we'll have a chat. So I'm going to terminate the session now, but if coaches want to stay on the line, we can have a little chat. So thank you very much, attendees. Just hit end meeting. And we'll just pause for 60 seconds.